Lunch. Mayor Cornett is currently presiding over another meeting and asked that we start in his stead. So I'd like to call the meeting to order and thank you all for joining us and coming. To begin, I'd like to welcome this afternoon's lunch sponsor, Mike Zito from AT&T. Mike is the General Manager and Executive Director of AT&T's Smart Cities unit inside the Internet of Things Solutions Department. He is responsible for the teams that drive product development, business development, and go-to-market strategy for AT&T's Smart Cities initiative, and was previously the Director of Strategy in AT&T's Mobile and Business Solutions Department. Please help me welcome Michael from AT&T.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's great to be here this afternoon with all of you. It's a true honor. And AT&T is proud to be one of the sponsors of the 2017 U.S. Conference of Mayors. Over the years, we've worked so closely with many of you, providing telecommunications and technology solutions to your cities and the citizens and businesses that you serve. We thank you for the partnership and the trust that you place in us every day to provide those services and solutions to your cities. This is an extremely exciting time for all of us when it comes to technology and innovation. The leaders in this room have a unique opportunity to drive incredible change through the strategic use of Internet of Things technology that will create tangible benefits for your citizens, businesses, and the environment. It's an exciting time for AT&T as well, as we are able to expand capabilities and the ways we're able to help serve communities where we work and where we live. For example, we recently were selected by FirstNet to build and manage America's first nationwide public safety broadband network dedicated to first responders when they need it. We are honored to be given this historic opportunity to transform the way public safety communicates, give police, firefighters, and EMS priority and preemption on a nationwide LTE network. And we are cognizant of the comments that President Clinton made yesterday as an industry and as a company. This significant public-private infrastructure investment is expected to create 10,000 U.S. jobs over the next 2 years from AT&T's work for FirstNet. We're also proud of the groundbreaking deal we did with General Electric earlier this year that we announced. In collaboration with GE, we will provide a solution that transforms outdoor LED lighting in a city into digital infrastructure with an intelligent sensor node. We've got one outside the room here, and feel free to stop by and see the team after lunch. This sensor node is equipped with cameras and sensors that help address issues like traffic flow and parking optimization, gunshot detection on city streets, air quality monitoring, and weather emergency alerts, all while driving economic development and inclusion. The digital infrastructure solution we're bringing to market with GE has the potential to address many of the common challenges that you see in your cities every single day. For example, in San Diego, they're deploying these nodes as part of their upgrade to their outdoor lighting system. And they've stated that they're going to save approximately $2.4 million per year in energy cost. That's from upgrading just 14,000 light poles of the 60,000 that they own and deploying 3,200 of these intelligent nodes in one city. I'll tell you that this is the largest municipal IoT deployment in the world. They'll also use this to generate revenue and economic development. And when you think of all the cities and possibilities represented here in this room, the magnitude of your impact could be enormous. Many of you are dealing with common challenges. The National League of Cities looked at mayoral speeches from cities large and small, and it's clear to see what's on your mind as city leaders. And we've been working with many of you for 2 years now since we were the first carrier to stand up a smart cities business, and we've listened. Economic development was the top issue, with 66% of you speaking about this in your State of the City address. Public safety was a close second at 64%, and infrastructure and budgets tied for third at 43%. With so many of you concerned about the same issues, there's a real opportunity to act and to tackle these pressing challenges. And that's what you as mayors do, you act. We know funding is an issue and increased uncertainty around funding for community development block grants. We also realize that the tax exemption for municipal bonds reduces a city's options to finance long-term infrastructure projects. AT&T has attractive financing programs with rates as low as 0% for cities that qualify, and a desire to work with you in creating public-private partnership models that are effective. AT&T is already working with many of you to address these challenges today. We're helping you break down the silos in your city government and in your region, We're helping you develop holistic strategies, leveraging IoT and smart city solutions to help create safer, smarter, more sustainable, and livable cities in an equitable manner. Right here in Miami-Dade County, working with Mayor Jimenez and his CIO, Angel Patisco, we're transforming and adding value to the public housing complexes with a program that drives efficiency through connected LED lighting upgrades and connected public safety cameras, creating a safer community for those residents. We're also helping them bridge the digital divide with increased connectivity and a Laptop for Good program. And our goal is to eventually roll this program out across the United States in collaboration with each of you and your teams. Additionally, Miami-Dade County is also using our Smart Cities Operations Center, taking data from disparate systems throughout the county and having it displayed in one dashboard so the county's leadership can get a view into this on a minute-by-minute basis and understand what's happening across the county. In addition to San Diego and Miami-Dade County, cities like Atlanta under Mayor Reed's leadership, Chapel Hill, Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, and Portland are already out in front of this. We're working closely with each of them and very proud to be helping them address the unique needs of their communities. Cities are a driving force for our nation's economy and the key to unlocking our future potential. Having a strong strategy and investing in smart technology and programs will help cities solve their biggest challenges while increasing opportunity for citizens and businesses that you're serving. Some of you in this room, I assume every mayor, may disagree with me, but I feel like I have the greatest job in the world. I stand at the intersection of technology and public policy with the ability to drive innovation and improve the lives of my fellow citizens. We're at the beginning of a journey where cities will become smarter, more efficient, safer, more livable, and have more opportunity for everyone to succeed here. This is an evolution, not a revolution. The people in this room and the teams you have back at home have already done so much great work. You should be really proud of the efforts so many of your cities and regions are making together. We'll develop more public-private partnerships, working together. We'll establish an even stronger collaboration. AT&T looks forward to continuing the journey with you as we work side by side to drive enormous benefits for your cities, regions, states, and your citizens using IoT technology and employing a holistic smart city strategy across those cities. Thank you very much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Let me ask Executive Director Tom Cochran to come up now with a special announcement. Tom?
I just want to make a quick announcement and a request. With the Senate ready to act this week on health care, we need to raise our voices and continue to fight to hold Washington accountable for protecting health care for our nation. As you know, it's a big part of our policy. It's been discussed before. So we're asking you to send a tweet or two from your account today at 2 p.m. using the hashtag Mayors Stand For All. Mayors Stand For All. I just sent you an email that gives you additional information and with some suggested wording for tweets, but I don't tell you how to tweet. We all know how. So thank you very much. If you could help us out, I think it really is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. All right, next we have the feature panel of today's lunch. It's entitled Collaborating to Secure America's Cities, Innovations, Trends, and Challenges. And to introduce the panel, I welcome up David Clooney. He's the Managing Director and Head of State and Local Government Relations for J.P. Morgan Chase & Company. David? No, let's hear it.
We got a 50-50 chance I look the wrong way.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let me get this.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor Cornett, and thank you all for allowing me to be with you here today. I think this is going to be a great conversation. So obviously, security and public safety are the kind of top-of-mind issue for every mayor, regardless of the makeup of your city. Some people might ask why J.P. Morgan Chase is involved in a conversation about security and public safety. It's a great question. At J.P. Morgan Chase, for us, the success of the communities we live and work in are closely linked to the success of our firm. Widely shared economic growth is not only a social responsibility, but it's a business imperative for us. You can't have economic growth and success without the communities that we're working and operating in thriving themselves. A few years ago at JPMorgan Chase, we did a strategic review of our engagement with our communities, and we decided to narrow our focus, particularly our philanthropic investments, around 4 main pillars that were very closely tied to our expertise and where we thought we could have the greatest impact. We decided to narrow our focus to 4 pillars of community development, workforce development, small business development, and consumer financial health, financial capability. And all 4 of these we've identified as universal drivers of growth. Now, in the last year, for example, we've given $250 million in philanthropic investments toward these efforts. In the next 5 years, JPMorgan Chase will deploy over $1 billion toward public-private partnerships around these efforts. We know, however, that money alone won't solve the problem. Writing a check and hoping for the best simply won't cut it. Every mayor in the room can think of examples of well-intentioned money, be it public or private, that unfortunately has failed to achieve the long-term impact that was intended. So for us, at JPMorgan Chase, we understand we need to bring our skills, our expertise, our relationship, our data, bring all of those things to the table and really be a partner with our government partners and drive sustainable and long-term impact. Companies like ours and like AT&T need to bring our assets to help solve these problems. Jamie Dimon, our CEO, who many of you are probably familiar with, last year we announced in July that we were raising the minimum wage for all of our employees, all of our hourly employees. And he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times talking about how with our most complex problems, the public, private, and nonprofit sectors working together have the best chance to actually make some type of impact. So that brings us to today's discussion. Last year, JPMorgan Chase embarked on a year-long project called Securing Global Cities by partnering with the Brookings Institution. General Ray Odierno, who you'll hear from later on this panel, co-led this effort with Michael Hanlon from the Brookings Institution, and we really they convened experts from around the world who were able to share their experiences and best practices and recommendations for how they get their arms around this vexing and sometimes seems insurmountable problem of how you secure your cities. In fact, on your tables, you'll see a copy of the Securing Global Cities report for all the mayors, and we also have our corporate responsibility report for May 2017 from JPMorgan Chase that talks about a model for impact. It looks very closely at our $150 million investment in Detroit and helping the city rebuild and how that's really a model for impact, the type of impact we want to have in the communities we serve around the country. So we know at JPMorgan Chase that without having security and public safety, you absolutely can't have the type of widely shared economic growth that we know is necessary for our business to thrive and for the communities that we operate, live, and work in to thrive. So with that context, I will begin to call up the panelists one by one, and as they're walking up, I'll give you a just very brief overview of each one of their backgrounds. So I'll start with General Ray Odierno. General Odierno had 39 years of distinguished military service, which culminated in 2015 when he retired as the 38th Chief of Staff of the Army. He was commanding general of the surge of multinational forces in Iraq. He had commanded units previously in Germany, Albania, Kuwait, and the United States, and he has now founded Odierno Associates, and we are very lucky to have him as a senior advisor at JPMorgan Chase & Company, among many other engagements. We also have former Chief of Police Chuck Ramsey, who has over 47 years of experience in law enforcement in his native Chicago, as well as Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, both of which where he was chief of police in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. He is president of the Police Executive Research Forum and the Major Cities Chiefs Association, being the only person to hold both posts. He was a member of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, and he's now, as you all know, an advisor to the Conference of Mayors. Next, we have Gary, Indiana Mayor, Karen Freeman Wilson. Mayor Freeman Wilson was twice elected as a Gary City judge. She was the executive director of the Indiana Civil Rights Commission. She was the Attorney General of Indiana. And in 2011, she became the first woman elected mayor of Gary and the first African-American female mayor in the state of Indiana. And now she chairs the Conference of Criminal and Social Justice Committee here at the Conference of Mayors. New Orleans Mayor Mitchell Andrew needs no introduction to this group. Thank you for being here. Obviously, tomorrow he will become your president. And let me just say, even though I won't go through Mayor Landrieu's resume. The story of, yesterday Bill Clinton talked about, mayors being everybody's neighbor. And the story of New Orleans, the comeback story of New Orleans has become an American comeback story. And I think one of the silver linings to come out of Katrina is that it brought all of America into New Orleans and made us all your neighbors. So I'll say we all appreciate that in your time, in your 7 years in office, it's become one of the fastest growing cities in America and a great place for us to do business. So thank you for your efforts. And then last but certainly not least, the moderator for this panel, Fran Townsend, who was Assistant to President George W. Bush for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, Chair of the Homeland Security Council, served 13 years at the Justice Department under 3 different presidential administrations. She has regularly appeared on network and cable television as a foreign policy, counterterrorism, and national and homeland security expert, and is currently Executive Vice President, Worldwide Government, Legal, and Business Affairs at McAndrews and Forbes. So with that, I'll turn the program over to Fran. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, it is a real privilege and honor to be here with you, the mayors, and to be with this panel. This is a great group of former colleagues and friends, and so I hope it'll be a great discussion. General Odierno, I'm going to kick it off with you. We heard about your Securing Global Cities study. You traveled around the world, around the country, spoke to many people in this room, and came away with some real valuable lessons. I was wondering if we could start the conversation by you sharing some of those.
Sure. So first, thank you very much for having me here. And I want to thank J.P. Morgan Brooks for really putting some effort into this project, which I think is important. So first is that the nature of the security threat has changed significantly over the last 15 years. And it's partly because of globalization. It's partly because of the new threat of terrorism. But what we have now is the threats are centering in the cities around the world. And they're changing. You have the threat of cyber attacks. You have the threat of insider terrorist activity. You have this idea of potentially linked global networks that are trying to establish themselves inside of cities. Then we have the issue of social cohesion. And so in my mind, one of the great lessons is that, in my mind, the point of SPEAR for security, not only security in cities, but national security, is really beginning inside of our cities. And I think it's important that we start to recognize that at the federal level. The second piece is private-public partnerships. I can't overemphasize enough the importance of building private-public partnerships to deal with the many challenges that we have inside of our cities. They are main residents inside of our cities. They should be involved in helping to establish what their role should be inside of each and every city. And the last one I'll just touch on is this idea of stovepipes and eliminating stovepipes. What we found in many cities is they really didn't eliminate stovepipes till after they had a catastrophic event. And what we mean by stovepipes is internal coordination inside of cities. It's also parallel coordination with fellow cities nearby. And then, of course, it's coordination up and down to the federal level, state level on down. And what we found is the relationships weren't being built that would help to either prevent activity or, if something happens, to react to activity. And we believe it's of the utmost importance to knock down these walls and make sure that we have coordination going on every single day and don't wait for a catastrophic event.
So let me pick up on something General Odierno said. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but I'd like you to answer this question in your own mind. I was the Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, and I had a very important role and that you needed me to do, and you needed me to act very quickly, which I'll explain in a second. But how many of you right now sitting here can name the current person who's in that role? I would venture to say it would be very few of you. That person's name is Tom Bossert. And the reason that's important to you, to make that relationship, just as one example of what General Odierno was saying, is whether it's a hurricane or it's snow or ice, a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, if you want a federal declaration and you need that signed timely to get access to funding, the last person who touches that before it hits the President of the United States' desk, which is where it's got to end up, is the person in that position. So Tom Bossert is the name that you and your staff need to know. You need to know that phone number, you need to know how to get him, and you need that. That's just one example of a relationship you need before there's an emergency. Mayor Landrieu, let me turn to you. You have made real clear, given New Orleans history and your own and all you've done for the city of New Orleans, that security and public safety is a top priority for you. You have put more than words behind that. You have invested yourself there. Can you talk about why, for you, making urban security is such a top priority for the mayors in the country?
Well, I think most of the mayors in here know this as clearly as well as I do, that keeping the streets safe, making people feel safe and secure is of paramount importance. We have terrible issues in some cities and in some neighborhoods across the country relating to street crime. That is something that we talk a lot about and we work hard to try to find answers to. But because New Orleans got beat so badly by Katrina and Rita, then Ike, then Gustav, then the national recession, which hit us all, and then the BP oil spill, on top of the security threats that we have faced just in terms of street crime. And as we have watched the attacks across the United States, in Orlando, in Boston, in New York, it's become painfully clear to us that it absolutely requires all federal, state, and local folks, horizontally and vertically, to become the fighting force moving forward, and it is the same people fighting all of those fights. And I agree with the general that the kind of threats are changing, and the way we're responding to those threats is changing, primarily because it requires complete and total integration. And I'm not comfortable yet that we as a nation have actually figured out how to have what the general would say is clear command and control, clear coordination, and what they call interoperability, which is the ability to see and hear across a bunch of different platforms and technology. Having said that, though, when the event happens, for example, the shooting that we saw in Alexandria of my dear friend Steve Scalise the other day, and I hope everybody keeps him in the prayers, that local police were like right there. And that immediate event, you saw federal officials, local officials, state officials, they have to know each other, which means that you have to anticipate, which means that you have to drill. And then you have to make sure that the systems that are set up are designed to not just be after action, but to be proaction as well. And so I'm really thankful that JP Morgan Chase has done this in general. I'm thrilled that all of you are thinking about this, because as I've said many times, and the chief and the mayor can say this, the 800,000 local law enforcement have become the tip of the spear in the fight against national security, homeland security, and public safety. And we just need to get better, and we need to get more, and we need to get quicker, and we need to be more proactive if we're going to secure the streets of America.
So there's also often, as we've seen, and regrettably, a friction between at the federal and state and local level. But sometimes we found that mayors aren't aware of assets that are available to them at the state level. One of those things is the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, where governors can exchange assets to deal with a crisis. And again, that's something that you and your staffs need to understand how to pull that thread quickly before the event happens. I'm going to turn to Chief Ramsey. You have nearly a half century of law enforcement experience. The chief was my protector when I lived in Washington, D.C., but also in Philadelphia and Chicago. Talk about, you were the co-chair of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. Yeah. Talk, Chief, if you would, about the importance and how you build that cooperation among state, local, and federal officials.
Well, collaboration is incredibly important, and it has improved tremendously. As you mentioned, I was in Washington, D.C. as police chief, actually on 9/11. I was there. And I remember when I first took over the department in Washington, one of the first things I was asked to do is fill out a security clearance form. And I filled it out, and then quite frankly kind of forgot about it, because pre-9/11, you really thought that as a federal function. I was worried more about street crime and not so much about terrorism. I didn't get a clearance, but the day after 9/11, my clearance came through, because immediately people began to recognize the need for us to be able to communicate in a way that prior to that really hadn't been all that necessary. So I've seen a lot of change, although there needs to be even more collaboration and more communication. For an example, I get concerned when I see events take place overseas. London obviously has had a couple horrific incidents take place. We've been relying on the FBI primarily to get our information in terms of any kind of security threats and so forth. But we need to be able to sit down with the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. We need to sit down with police chiefs overseas to kind of talk amongst ourselves about some of the problems and issues that may not necessarily come through when we're looking at it strictly from a counterterrorism perspective. And I would argue that mayors need to do the same thing, talking to their counterparts over there, because there are always problems, concerns, issues, things that didn't work quite well, that you need to just be able to sit down and just really be able to go through. And so the world is connected now. And it's no longer just about what's happening within our own country, within our own jurisdiction, or what have you. It's about what's happening around the world. And we need to have real clear lines of communication. We've always thought of collaboration in policing as federal, state, and local. Well, private security covers about 80% of critical infrastructure in the United States, and they need to be part of that conversation as well. Our business community, the public at large. I mean, if we have an event take place and we have all these plans and we tabletop, but we don't involve the public, and you're going to have chaos when this thing happens. And so if people don't know what's expected of them, what to do, if we don't involve them in some drills and things of that nature, then what can we expect at the moment something actually occurs? They don't quite know what to do themselves. So we've really got to reach out and touch more people, I think, than we do now.
I agree.
Chief Ramsey, thank you for that, because it really leads in perfectly. What many people may not know about Mayor Freeman was that she had served as Indiana's Attorney General, as a judge, and also led major conversations on drug courts and civil rights. You have now seen how decisions and actions of government can have profound effects at the individual level. At the Conference of Mayors, you chaired a working group of mayors and police chiefs, which developed a set of important recommendations aimed at strengthening police and community relations. And I think it goes to the heart of what Chief Ramsey was saying. If you could talk for a moment about issues of social cohesion, the effect of the much talked about now changes to immigration policy, from your perspective, Mayor.
Well, Fran, first, I thought we were new friends, but then you reminded everybody that I couldn't keep a job. So I don't know. But I really do appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this conversation and the fact that J.P. Morgan Chase has raised this issue across the globe. You know, there are two aspects of your question that I'd like to address. The first is that whether you're talking about the cooperation among law enforcement at the state, federal, and local level, or whether you're talking about how resources are deployed in terms of preparation for the disasters that may occur, it's all about building trust in the community and building trust among people. You have to have local police officers who trust the state troopers, who trust the federal law enforcement officers, DEA, who have a relationship with the military. You know, the National Guard factor heavily into the work that we do at the local level. And so you have to have that level of trust and the understanding that we're all working towards the same goal. We want to protect the same citizens. They look to us to have a level of maturity and a level of really service and humility where it's not about who's in charge of an investigation, where it's not about who leads, it's really about how do we serve them the best. And, you know, inevitably, and Mayor Mitch alluded to it earlier, the local law enforcement are going to be the first to the scene. They're going to be the folks that are really respond the first line of defense. But at the end of the day, we all have to work together in order to deploy the resources that you talked about, to understand what those resources are, and to get those resources to the citizens in the greatest way. The other aspect of that question is, particularly if you think about immigration, if you think about disaster recovery, it's extremely important that every sector of the city feels like they are being considered as we develop solutions, as we develop a disaster recovery plan, as we look at the impact of policies on citizens, that they are being considered. And the best way to make sure that they understand that this means you is to really engage them in the conversation. And so when it's about community engagement, for me and Gary, it's not just about the lakefront community. It's about every sector of the city. When you talk about community engagement in New Orleans, the 9th Ward has to be included in addition to the French Quarter and the downtown area. And when you send that message to citizens, then they, sit up proudly and they want to be involved because they think, well, they do care about what happens in my community. They do care about me. And it's something that mayors have to work on every day because we're being pulled in so many directions. But I think that one of the requirements of leadership is that we think about everyone and very often at the same time.
So, sure.
If I could just, I want to add something to this. As we looked at not only the cities of the United States, but overseas, one other common factor we found is you cannot separate what you do in local policing and your security infrastructure from your public policy as well as your economic development programs, because they are all interrelated and linked. They have to be working together, and when they are, when we see it working together, you see an increased security, because it has to do with jobs, it has to do with education, it has to do with opportunity, and then it has to do with having the appropriate training and the appropriate capabilities within your police force. We're having the same debate nationally now with the State Department, and it's the same thing at the local level. You've got to have an investment in all of these areas in order to appropriately deal with the security challenges that you have. And one of the things we have to do is bring more attention to that as we move forward.
Let me pick up on something Mayor Freeman said. Mayor Landrieu, look, mayors are busy people. Day to day, you're responsible for filling potholes and getting garbage collected. And how do you ensure that you have spent adequate time and get the adequate resources for this public safety job?
Well, I think every mayor in here would attest to the challenge of putting a budget together every year. We all, I don't know if New Orleans does, and I would assume most of the mayors have balanced budget requirements, and we can't print money. So it's a zero-sum game for us. What we're spending on mental health or substance abuse or recreation, you can't spend over here. If you are doing it for seniors, you may not be able to create swimming programs for juniors during recreation. And how much you spend on the back end of crime has a lot to do with what you spend on the front end of everybody else. In case y'all didn't hear it, I want to repeat what the general said. The same issues they're having on the national level looking overseas, the fight between soft diplomacy in the State Department and hard just stuff in the Department of Defense, bullets, guns, ships, when needed, deployment of real boots on the ground versus how you stop something from happening, is almost the identical fight on the domestic side that we're having. Is, do you invest money in the kind of social cohesion that the general just talked about? Now, a lot of us would say you can't police your way out of this. Well, we know that there are bad folks and they're going to do bad things, and that when they're hurting themselves or hurting other people, we have to stop them. But it is a real challenge for all of us mayors to think about what percentage of our budgets we're spending on the back end. That would be police, jails, all of those kinds of things, versus on the front end that will help create that social cohesion. And it is a massive challenge for all of us. I think all of us know that early money and prevention will save you a lot of money on the back end. The question is how we get from one to the other and how we focus. So that's one issue. The second issue is then again one of integration, and I think Chief Ramsey spoke to this. All of you have this already, and Fran, you alluded to it as well. Get to know who your counterparts are on the levels of government that are different from yours. So for example, if you have an emergency ops center, make sure that you know your counties that are in and around you, and then your partners on the state level, and then your partners on the federal level. And when you're going federal, just don't think about who's sitting in Washington, think about who the regional director is and the local director too. And then finally, who your private sector partners are. And then thirdly, the much larger issue that I think the general is trying to teach us about, because he's looking at security systems in big cities all over the world. The mayor from Sao Paulo was here the other day, 24 million in his city, 380,000 in mine. But the same security threats, and what we are learning now is that all of the fighting forces on the soft side and on the big side are all integrated, so it's not broken down anymore, and you can't just think of it in terms of federal, state, and local. It's the same group of people. And Chief Ramsey can tell you that in Philadelphia, in New Orleans, and Mayor, it's the same. When we're going after gangs in New Orleans, FBI, DEA, ATF, US Marshal, and the NOPD, my guys and gals, are in the room together. And there's only one captain of that ship that day, and it's one of those different agencies, and they're acting together. But sometimes we fund things and we create strategies as though they're all different. And I think that the threats are coming at us are coming so fast, and they're coming in so many different ways that we have to reorganize how we fight that fight and how we prepare ourselves for it.
So I'm going to pick up on the idea of the sort of ever-changing threat. I can't do that without acknowledging Mayor Dyer, who's here from Orlando, who did an extraordinary job dealing with the Pulse nightclub. General, I'm going to turn to you for this, right? You and I spent many years fighting this emerging threat, the foreign fighter, the overseas threat, how it manifests itself here, and now what we call the homegrown threat. Can you talk to us about kind of how you see the threat landscape and how people need to be thinking about it?
Well, I think, first off, I think what's changed is the threats that we deal with at the national level overseas are actually can be very simply interconnected now all the way down to our cities, whether it be through the internet, whether it be through propaganda, whether it be for somebody getting radicalized. So that's changed. And so when I look at our national security today, I think of it in, we should think about it outside in, then we have to think about it inside out. And the problem we're having today is we don't think about it inside out. And so we don't think about how the jobs of our mayors, which I believe are the point of the spear in many cases now inside of our country, how are we giving them the responsibility and tools in order to fight that threat inside out, which is a national threat. Our biggest national security threats today, in my opinion, are the insider terrorism threat and cybersecurity. And so I believe those are going to potentially happen inside of our cities first. And so we have to make sure we understand that. And so we have to look at it differently. It's really what the mayor was just saying. We have to look at it differently. And when you look at it differently, you have to come up with different solutions. And nobody today is looking at that, in my opinion, from the federal level. And how does it impact at the local level? I also believe our corporate entities have a responsibility as well. And I think we have to mix those together. When we talked about many of these programs that maybe you can do for employment and education, I believe that's where all these philanthropic efforts of our major corporations should be playing a role. And they should be coordinated and synchronized so that money can be used by the mayors in a coordinated, synchronized fashion that helps to deal with improving the social cohesion inside of our cities.
Chief Ramsey, can you talk for a moment, I firmly agree with General Odierno about the role of the public-private partnership to support our mayors and communities. And so weaving together the public-private partnership, citizen support, because that's how you're going to, those eyes and ears are how you're going to spot the threat in those communities. We've seen programs like See Something, Say Something. Can you talk about how to engage communities in the private sector to help you do that job of securing our communities?
Well, I think it's, the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, we identified 6 areas that we wanted to focus on. There are others that could have been focused on, but we had limited time. But the very first pillar, we called it, was building trust and legitimacy within our communities, because that's incredibly important. We have to be able to break down barriers, build that trust and legitimacy with the communities that we serve. Now, that includes the business community, the private sector as well, and establishing relationships. But I also want to take time to mention something that's very important, because, the role of police now and what a police chief has to do in today's world is far more than they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because we have to deal with, obviously, the threat of terror and so forth. But I got asked quite often, what keeps you up at night? Well, it wasn't worrying about ISIS. It was worrying about the street crime that takes place in our cities every single day. Philadelphia last year had 277 homicides. Not a single one was caused by ISIS. These are all local folks, gangs, drugs, just the typical nonsense, people that don't know how to resolve a problem or an issue short of pulling out a gun and shooting folks. I mean, that's the threat that we have to be able to deal with. And that's why it's so important that we be able to focus on both. It's not an either-or proposition. Sure. Because what's going to get a police chief or a mayor thrown out of office is not going to be the threat of terror from overseas. It's going to be what's going on right in your own community. So that's not minimizing what's going on. But I mention that only because even something at Ferguson, Missouri, for an example, after Ferguson, Missouri, you heard all this discussion about the so-called militarization of police. Oh, they don't need all this equipment. Oh, they don't need this, they don't need that. Well, you've got to respond to a variety of different things when you get that 911 call. Nobody calls 911 to say good morning. They call because they got a problem, right? And so let's take Orlando, the Pulse nightclub. You have an active shooter, you better hope you got cops that show up with more than a flashlight and a nightstick. That is a totally different situation that we have to be prepared to respond to, as opposed to trying to break up a group of kids standing on a corner or something like that. Somebody got their car stolen. So we have a range of responsibilities, and you need training and equipment to be able to deal with all those kinds of things. And that's the complexity that we're faced with now, the kind of support and training that we need to get at the federal government, support from state. We need to be able to do all these kinds of things so that when something happens, we are going to be the first responders, and we have to be able to deal with it effectively.
Can I add on to this, because I want to adopt everything that the chief just said, and I want to add more to it. The word terror is a very powerful word, as is foreign enemy. And when the United States of America hears terror and foreign enemy, money is not an option. It's just not. The government will write a check, however big it has to be, to put boots on the ground or to invest in technology to do whatever is necessary to protect us. So, buddy, when the Orlando incident happened, there was a lot of talk with the talking heads. I'm not saying that you were on it, about whether that was a terror incident or not. But I want to put that issue aside for just a second and reiterate what the chief just said to you. It's not that that's not of concern to us. It is. But if you asked police chiefs and mayors on the ground, what is the most immediate threat? It's violent crime on the streets of America. Since last week, when my friend Steve suffered through that attempted assassination, almost 90 people every day in America have been killed on the streets of America. And mayors talk about this all the time, and in many instances, other than in the communities where it's actually happening, there's a collective yawn in the sense of, well, we don't know what to do about that. Well, mayors face that every day. My city's having a terrible time right now. Chicago is, Baltimore, lots of other folks. This is a major issue. Now, when you fold that on top of the number of suicides that are occurring, President Clinton talked very passionately, as did the First Lady from New York, about opioid addiction and deaths. All of these things are bound, and here's how they're bound. When in Orlando or in New York or in Boston, I think Marty's up there, when the police are the first responders, and then the local emergency medical folks who are awesome, and then the firefighters, and then they go to the trauma wards. Those are all the same people that are responding to the potential quote-unquote terrorist attacks as well. And I think the message that mayors are sending to the rest of the country is we're working really, really hard, but we need to have more boots on the ground. We need to have more assets. We need to have better coordination, because all of those threats fold into themselves and they all come through 911. It's the same portal. And I think that what the general has been alluding to, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, is that not only are the number of threats changing, but how they're coming to us are changing. What's not changing is that the men and women who are in uniform that are in local law enforcement, the 800,000, and all of the emergency medical services and all the folks that work in the trauma units, all of whom are heroes, are the same people that are shouldering the burdens along with our federal folks. And we've got to do more, and we've got to do better.
Mayor, let me pick up on that, because that's especially poignant in cities like Gary, that Mayor Freeman's dealing with, where you've got economic loss, job loss, population loss, and but you can't not answer that 911 call.
You can't.
How do you balance that, Mayor? It's got to be a real challenge for you.
That's the issue that we face every day, and it's interesting because we've been talking about disasters, right? Terrorism. We talk about mass violence that occurs. And even when you have a tornado or a hurricane, I mean, that's a mass event that occurs that people respond to immediately. But what happens when you have a steel industry and related manufacturing that go from employing over 35,000 people to essentially 7,000 or 8,000, and it happens over the course of 40 years? Now that's a disaster by any stretch or by any definition that you call it. But because, like the violence on our streets, it happens 1 week at a time or 1 year at a time in terms of the loss of population. We went from almost 200,000 people to essentially 80,000 or 90,000 if you think there's a census undercount. Then that changes the response that you see, because people don't really view that as urgent or as catastrophic. But the impact of it, when you look at a 25% vacant and abandoned building problem, when you look at a 42% poverty rate, when you look at all of the other related issues that come with that, it is absolutely an issue. And that's where the integration comes, because it's not just Gary. It's Flint, it's Cleveland, it's so many cities that have had a similar problem. You have to look at it comprehensively. That's where the coordination of the federal and state and local government comes in. That's where we can't have this division. You know, people often ask, well, how does it feel that Gary is in this red state? You know what? It can't feel any type of way to me. I need to figure out how to work with Governor Holcomb and whoever else is in office, because my citizens need me to, you know, what does it mean that you have a president who is of a different party? It can't mean anything, because citizens aren't looking for us to create these silos that the general talked about earlier. They're counting on us to look at ways to make it happen. Now, our position is that mayors have to lead the way, because we're the ones who are seeing folks every day in the grocery store, as we go to City Hall, in parks, who are saying, you know, why is all of this grown up out here? The city used to, and they don't want to hear me talk numbers and say, well, we used to have $20 more million to do it. They want to know, what are you going to do about it now? And the reality is that the answer doesn't just lie at the local level. It comes with partnerships, with public-private partnerships, with foundations, with all of those things. We have to come up with those solutions.
And that's the perfect segue. So, General Odierno, lest I leave everyone with indigestion from all of these challenges, can you give us sort of some examples that you found in your study of successful public-private partnerships to help address some of these issues?
Well, I mean, I think I think the one I would use is probably Detroit. And what you had there is you had Quicken Loans, you had GM, and you had JP Morgan, who decided that they were going to work directly with the mayor and the governor to help solve and provide capabilities as they continued to revitalize the city of Detroit. And whether it be putting up security cameras that are linked directly to the police stations, or whether it's investing in infrastructure, or whether it's investing in programs, educational programs, they all realized for them to be successful inside of Detroit, that they needed to be part of the solution. And I think what was different there is that you had a mayor and a governor as well who worked very closely with them, where they had specific confidence that that money would be put to the use it was intended to be used for. And so they really worked hard together at doing that, and I compliment them on it. There's still lots of work that has to be done in Detroit. There's still other things that they're working on, but I think it's a great example. And I think it's one that, if I was a mayor, the first thing I would do is I'd bring in all of my major corporations and I would challenge them that they have a responsibility. And I would challenge them to come together, and you might already do this, to synchronize and coordinate their investments inside of your city, because it really helps them. And they should be part of the solution, and I think we have to do more of that.
You know, I will go, JP Morgan, I'm going to tout your own horn for you. JP Morgan has done an extraordinary job. I sit on the New York City Police Foundation board, and JP Morgan committed millions of dollars in technology to help modernize the police department in the way they communicate and the way they're able to take advantage of their own statistical information. And so don't underestimate the businesses in your communities that live in your communities and their willingness to invest back in their communities, because it's good business. So I'm going to open it up.
And I would just say you should make them feel guilty if they're not doing it too.
Absolutely.
It's their responsibility.
Guilt works. We wanted to leave a couple minutes before we wrap up to see if there are any questions from the audience or the mayors. I'm happy to keep asking them questions. These are very smart people with lots of great experience.
Fran, can I just say, I want to be Detroit when I grow up. Gary wants to be Detroit when we grow up.
That's right. Okay, Chief Ramsey, let me go back to you. I don't see any questions yet. Let me go back to you for a minute and ask you, can you think back in 3 major cities, the best examples of sort of coordination and support you had, whether it was at different levels of government or with the private sector, and what you found to be effective in establishing those relationships?
Well, there are a couple. One example is Washington, D.C. When I came to Washington, D.C., we didn't have a foundation. You mentioned the New York City Foundation. We had to start one from scratch, and of course they have something called the Federal City Council in Washington, D.C. that some people are not aware of, but if you live and work around Washington, you're very much aware of the Federal City Council. These are the real movers and shakers, both on the political end, business end, and so forth. And they got together and decided to create that foundation because, as Mayor Landrieu mentioned, you know, the cities can only do so much, and they were able to give us funds to start up a lot of different programs. And I remember one, we had, there's a housing complex there called Sursum Corda, where we were having a lot of homicides, and the straw that broke the camel's back was a 13-year-old girl that got murdered in a stairwell there. Well, they came in and gave us a lot of support in terms of, one, providing some programs for the kids there, built a playground there. Of course, we had to put the security there to keep the drug dealers from taking it over, but that, to this day, that has not occurred. So it changed the entire environment. Within a very short period of time. We never would have done that without that public-private partnership. And Philadelphia, very similar. I mean, a lot of it I'm mentioning now is coming through the foundation, because that's how you get your businesses and others involved to understand the problems and the issues and provide that short-term support to be able to get something off the ground that's really going to be meaningful. In Philly, we focus mostly on youth programs designed for young people.
So let me build on what you were saying. You know, as I listened to you, I recall people think some of the things that the Police Foundation in New York City funds are publicly funded. So for example, the single most effective program that we've got is the tip line, the Crime Stoppers tip line. That's privately funded by businesses in New York City. And the police department now can't imagine functioning without it. It was the Police Foundation that funds literally every one of the overseas detailees from the New York City Police Department that are in places like London so that they can get information quickly and directly so that they can adjust their own security posture. So don't underestimate what your business communities are willing to do and undertake in terms of a long-term financial commitment to be of assistance. Mayor Landrieu, maybe you could speak just for a second before we wrap up about the role of technology in helping you to be effective in terms of your deployment and use of resources and what you need in a city like New Orleans.
Well, that's, again, on the issue of interoperability, if you will, the ability to see and to hear across different agencies has become paramount. I think that I'm recalling a little bit from a report that was written after 9/11 by Congressman Hamilton and Governor Keene, who basically said when they were doing a postmortem on the response that everybody did a great job, but they had some issues. And one of the issues was folks that were firemen that were in the subway couldn't talk to firemen that were actually upside. In Katrina, we had the same problem 5 years later, which is one of the reasons why when some folks got stuck on the levees, it was because the buses didn't know where to go because nobody could talk to each other. Subsequent to that time, emergency operations centers around the country and the creation of fusion centers through technology that's been funded through the Department of Homeland Security actually has gotten better, which is one of the challenges with the president's new budget because they actually cut funding for these kinds of things. That is not a good idea. If you're going to see and hear, you have to share the same space and you have to be on the same frequency. So technology is very important. When there are major events in big cities, a lot of Super Bowl, NBA, and they rise to a level of certain security clearance, with the presidential inauguration being the highest and the Super Bowl, you know what I'm talking about, you should give this speech. The second, it then brings with it a security package that allows the federal government to see more things and to share more. So the see something, say something program all comes from those pieces of technology, and then as the chief said, encouraging the public to really be involved with technology to make sure that they can hear through tweets what's going on. It's a tornado coming, and the way that we tell folks that. Or if they see a potential terrorist threat, they see a bag that's been left unattended that looks kind of weird, they can actually call up. That kind of stuff has made eyes and ears more ubiquitous and is very helpful, and the more that we can do. Ray talked a minute ago about corporations being able to help, not just in investments in cities, but from a security point of view. There's no reason why every one of the businesses all across America can't have their own security cameras. That could actually be tied into and part of. In Boston, Mayor Walsh can talk about this more, but I think the initial pictures of the bombers came from private security cameras on businesses. Yeah. And the same thing's probably true in Orlando, and I know that it's true in New York, and Mayor Bulwidge and his team did a great job actually doing with the work that they did. So that kind of integration and that kind of technology is going to help us do more. I do want to say this, though. You asked me a question that I didn't answer. My budget for public safety is more than 50% of everything that I spend on everything else. It might be upwards of 62% now. Now, everybody that's got a company knows this. If you're spending more than half on security, you're not spending half on business development, product development, and all. And for mayors, if we're spending that much on security on the back end, funding the jail, funding police, funding the cars, funding the gas that goes in the car, funding the handcuffs, funding the long guns, God forbid, because of incidents as we saw in Baton Rouge and Dallas, you're not on the front end doing the stuff that the general now told us that we all need to do, which is on reading, literacy, early childhood education, nutrition, all of those kinds of things that create the social cohesion that the mayor said you absolutely need. So the best way to stay out of trouble is to make sure that the investments in the front end make sense, so you don't create the conditions. This is the big thing, create the conditions where the kind of radicalization or the kind of violence can hold true like a public health threat. And so one of the other notions that we need to start thinking about is, yes, it's a security threat, but it's a public health threat as well. And violence transmits itself just like a virus does. And if we can start thinking about it like that, we might be able to approach it, as the general said, from inside out rather than outside in. And I think if we look at it differently, we might come up with something that works a little bit better.
If I could just add on the technology very quickly, and the mayor touched on it, sharing information, sharing intelligence is important. But what we're finding today is the amount of data and information that is available is actually making it more difficult. And where technology can really play a role is helping to sort through the information, because you have to get the right information at the right time to make the right decision, or at least have a chance of making the right decision. And so it's that technology that, in my mind, can help the cities and the mayors the most. And it helps make these centers that you've established incredibly more effective and will enable them to react. What you want to build is an ability to be proactive, not reactive. And if you get the information and are able to sort through it appropriately, it enables you to be more proactive.
But you know, you also have to change your thinking. What is it that would allow a person to say, instead of spending $30,000 on a jail cell,
Right.
I'm going to spend half of that or a third of that on early education? Sometimes it takes a person to have the courage to step up, whether it's in front of a city council, in front of a legislature, in front of Congress, to say, we're going to spend the money early. And other times it's just an economic argument to say, you know what, you really could save on the back end if you make that investment on the front end.
When the practical problem, though, I agree with you, Mayor, but the practical problem about the how do you do that is that sometimes you've got to spend more money up front to save money later, and it's the transition. Because we have zero-sum budgets, it's kind of hard. It's an either-or choice. It would be great because it's the bridge that's hard for us practically to figure out how to do. And that's just it's just, you know, everybody in here suffers through that. You know that better than I do.
Crime scares people.
Yeah,
Right.
And so it's hard to overcome that. But if you had, as a police chief, if during your budget time, you said, I'd rather you hire more mental health workers than hire more cops,
right,
then you start to make some progress.
Yeah. We're getting you.
Let's hear it for our panelists. It's been a great discussion. Thank you all very much. And I know a couple of them have planes to catch. So if they're not able to talk to you as they run out the door, you'll understand, and I'm sure you can get in touch with them later. But thank you all again. Really appreciate it. All right, everybody has their cell phone with them. Pull your cell phone out and start reserving next June 8th through 11th. I want you to save the dates for the 2018 United States Conference of Mayors summer meeting. It's in Boston. The mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh, is here with us somewhere. Marty, raise your hand so I can, he's over here. He's right up here off my elbow. Okay, Marty's gonna come up and talk. First, we have a video about Boston. Again, June 8th through 11th of 2018.
That's what you've taught us, Boston. That's what you've reminded us, to persevere. Even when it hurts, we summon the strength that maybe we didn't even know we had, and we carry on. We finish the race.
Thank you very much. And I want to just first of all start thanking Mayor Cornett for his great leadership in this conference. I've been fortunate enough to be mayor now for 3.5 years, and every year the presidents of this organization just keep this organization consistent, and it's great to see it. And I know we talk a lot about bipartisanship in a positive way in this organization, but we should, because we are the leaders of the country, all the mayors. And Mayor, thank you very much for your great leadership this year, leading this conference. I also want to give a shout out to Mayor Landry for his, I think his family's here, so I know he met his mom and dad last night, and his wife and his son and his daughter, so we look forward to working with you next year, Mitch, with moving forward. Also, two more things before I get into my remarks. Number one is, before you leave today, outside of our booth, we have a bowl that you put your card in it, and if you win, Converse will make your own sneaker with your own city symbol or whatever you want on there, so make sure you put it in there. We have one on display from the city of Boston, so don't forget that. And secondly, this has been an incredible conference. This hotel is beautiful. The grounds are beautiful. And I want to give a special shout out because they're having a little labor negotiation right now, and that's to Local 335 Unite here. Let's thank all the housekeepers, all of the people, the servers. A hotel is only as good as the people that work in it. So let's remind the management here that they have a great group of people working for us. And as we go around, just to thank them. When I gave my inaugural address in 2014, I said that to the people of Boston, I would listen, I would learn, I would lead in every single neighborhood of the city of Boston. What I didn't know that I would also listen to and learn and lead from cities like Miami, from Dallas, from San Francisco, from Los Angeles, and nearly every single city in the United States of America. To me, this United States Conference of Mayors is about more than sharing ideas. It starts with learning about the hopes and dreams of the people that serve every single corner of the United States of America. The power of mayors is multiplied by 1,000. We stand with the people we serve. We listen to them, and we also are accountable to them. At the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we bring all of those different voices together. Across our unique differences of culture and history, we find common ground. That's a very powerful experience, and it's also a very hopeful experience. And also, it's an American experience. The U.S. Conference of Mayors meets next year in June. I hope that you will come and learn in our city and learn from our city. Boston is a world-class city, a capital of learning, from colleges and universities to powerful global innovation, from preschool classrooms to proven to close the achievement gap, to apprentices for young people who need a chance. Boston is a city of traditions and a city of revolutions. We have America's first public school, first public park, first public library, and first public subway. We're a walking city. We see startups and innovators on the same streets where Paul Revere made his famous ride. We're on the waterfront. The harbor that we dumped the British tea in is now home to leading companies and world headquarter companies from all over the world. First and foremost, we're a city of compassion. We have ended chronic veterans homelessness, and we're on a track to end all chronic homelessness. That challenge, by the way, of ending veterans homelessness happened right here by Michelle Obama at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We took her up on that challenge, and we're able to do that like many of the cities that I'm talking to today. We're a city of diversity. We're a city of immigrants, including my mother and father. What more can I say? Boston is the city I was born in and have lived in every single day of my life. I believe that America looks to Boston as a beacon. I know you believe about your cities as well. The U.S. Conference of Mayors shows us that all of those beliefs have come true and are the same. America looks to its cities for leadership, and it looks to us now more than ever. So I invite all of you to come to our city, Boston, Massachusetts, in June, to listen and to share ideas. I invite you to Boston next year to teach and to help us learn. I invite you to Boston next summer to lead your cities and lead America forward. And I look forward to seeing all of you in the great city of Boston next June. Thank you very much.
All right, so a reminder, we have several task force that meet at 2:30, so check your schedules. Task Force on Aging, Task Force on Mayors and Metro Universities, Task Force on Veteran Affairs. At 2:30, there's also an executive committee meeting. At 5 o'clock, the Community Leaders of America, the Republican Mayors Association, is getting together, and also the National Conference of Democratic Mayors is meeting. Tonight, the ultimate beach party is at 7 o'clock. The buses leave at 6:30, and I have a special consideration for you. Some of you know I have a program going on in Oklahoma City asking the children to read 20 minutes a day during the summer for the obvious reasons that this audience wouldn't need to be reminded of. Well, my own granddaughters are rebelling, and they're at the conference. They're going to be there tonight, and if you see any of them, you would help me if you would reinforce that 20 minutes a day motto. Ask them if they've read today, ask them if they're going to read tomorrow, and together we're going to make sure that that reading skills gap doesn't start with my family. Again, the buses tonight start at 6:30, the beach party starts at 7, and then we'll be back here at 9:30 for a special party for Mitch Landrieu. And
well, it's Mick and Mitch.
Okay.
So, and it's in this hotel, so you can drink all night and then get on the elevator.
And Tom will drag you to bed.
So don't forget tonight here after our big party. Thank you.
And don't forget to read 20 minutes a day. We're adjourned.
Call it a mom's adoration foundation, a special bond.